Marcus Thompson sat in the back row of his American history class, nervously adjusting his worn backpack straps as Mrs. Rodriguez announced the day's assignment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the classroom, filled with 17-year-olds who seemed to have everything figured out except him. Today we're going to share stories about our family's military service, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying across the room. I want each of you to tell us about a family member who served our country and what their service meant to your family. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had been dreading this moment since seeing it on the syllabus weeks ago. Around him, students eagerly raised their hands, ready to share tales of grandfathers who stormed beaches in World War II, uncles who served in Iraq, and fathers who were currently deployed overseas. These were the kids with military family photos proudly displayed in their homes, with flag cases containing folded flag from funeral services, with stories that commanded respect and admiration. But Marcus had something different, something that made him feel simultaneously proud and terrified to share. His mother, Sarah Thompson, had been a Navy SEAL. The problem wasn't that she had served. The problem was that nobody believed him when he told them. Female Navy SEALs were so rare that most people assumed they didn't exist at all. When Marcus had mentioned it before to classmates, he'd been met with eye rolls, snickers, and outright accusations of lying. The worst part was that his mother had been forced to retire early due to a combat injury that left her with a pronounced limp and chronic pain, making her appear less like the Hollywood image of an elite warrior that people expected. Sarah worked now as a night security guard at a local warehouse, a job that barely paid enough to cover their small apartment's rent. She wore oversized uniforms that hid her compact, muscular frame, and she rarely talked about her military service except to Marcus in quiet moments when the pain medication made her more reflective than usual. "I don't want people's pity," she had told him once when he suggested she apply for better jobs using her military background. "And I don't want to have to prove myself over and over again to people who've already made up their minds about what I can and can't be." Marcus understood her perspective, but it left him in an impossible position. He was incredibly proud of his mother's service, of the sacrifices she had made, of the strength and courage that had carried her through some of the military's most demanding training and dangerous missions. But he had learned to keep that pride to himself because sharing it only led to humiliation. "Marcus," Mrs. Rodriguez's voice cut through his thoughts. "Would you like a share?" The classroom fell silent. Marcus could feel 29 pairs of eyes turning toward him. Some faces showed mild interest. Others barely concealed impatience to get their turn. In the front row, Jessica Chun sat with her perfectly organized binder open to a page of notes about her grandfather's service in the Korean War. Behind her, Tyler Brooks had already shown everyone a photo of his father in Army dress blues. These students came from families where military service was discussed openly, where stories were passed down with pride, where the complexity and reality of war was often simplified into heroic narratives that fit comfortably into classroom presentations. Marcus envied them that simplicity, even as he recognized its limitations. "My mom served," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the air conditioning unit's hum. "Could you speak up, please?" Mrs. Rodriguez encouraged. "And tell us which branch and what her role was." Marcus took a deep breath. He had two choices: lie and make up some safe, believable story, or tell the truth and face the inevitable ridicule. He thought about his mother getting ready for work that morning, moving carefully because her back was acting up again, kissing him goodbye, and reminding him to do his homework. She had served with honor and distinction. She deserved to have her story told, even if no one would believe it. She was a Navy SEAL, Marcus said, his voice stronger now. The reaction was immediate. Someone in the middle of the room snorted. He could hear whispered conversations starting up. Tyler Brooks turned around completely in his seat to stare at him with obvious skepticism. "Seriously?" Tyler said, his voice dripping with doubt. "A female Navy SEAL? Come on, man. Women can't be SEALs," added Brittany Walsh from the third row, her tone matter of fact. "Everyone knows that." Mrs. Rodriguez held up her hand for quiet, but Marcus could see the doubt in her expression too. She clearly thought he was either confused about his mother's actual role or deliberately fabricating a story for attention. "Marcus," she said carefully, "are you sure about that? Perhaps your mother served in a different capacity in the Navy? There are many important roles that—" "She was a SEAL," Marcus interrupted, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. She served in Afghanistan. She has the trident. She was part of special operations. The whispers grew louder. Marcus could hear fragments of conversation. Yeah, right. Why would he lie about that? My dad says women aren't strong enough. This is so embarrassing. Tyler Brooks raised his hand without waiting to be called on. Mrs. Rodriguez, I think Marcus is confused. My dad's a Marine recruiter, and he says women definitely can't be SEALs. It's like a physical impossibility or whatever. This statement seemed to give other students permission to voice their doubts more openly. Hands shot up around the room. My uncle was in the Navy, said Jake Morrison. He would have mentioned if there were female SEALs. Maybe his mom just worked on the base or something, suggested Ashley Kumar with false sympathy. Like in an office job, and he got confused about what that meant. Or maybe she was a nurse, added Brittany. That's important too. He doesn't need to make up stories. Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment and anger. These students weren't just questioning the facts of his mother's service. They were dismissing the possibility that she could have been capable of such service at all. The underlying assumptions in their comments stung almost as much as their disbelief. She has the medals, Marcus said desperately. She has photos. Photos can be faked, Tyler said with a shrug. People do it all the time for social media. The classroom erupted in laughter. It wasn't malicious laughter exactly, but it was the kind of laughter that comes when a group collectively decides someone is being ridiculous. Marcus felt smaller and smaller in his seat, wishing he could disappear entirely. Mrs. Rodriguez was trying to regain control of the situation, but Marcus could see that she was also struggling with how to handle what she clearly believed was a student's elaborate lie. She probably thought he was acting out for attention, or perhaps dealing with some kind of family fantasy that had gotten out of hand. Let's move on to the next presentation, she said diplomatically. Marcus, perhaps you could bring in some documentation next week if you'd like to share more about your family service. The implication was clear. Prove it or stop wasting everyone's time. Marcus spent the rest of the class period in a haze of humiliation. Students continued to cast glances his way, some amused, others pitying. When the bell rang, he was the first one out the door, but not before he heard Tyler say loudly to his friends, "Can you believe that guy? A female Navy SEAL? What's next? His grandma was an astronaut." The laughter followed Marcus down the hallway. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table in their small apartment, staring at his homework but unable to concentrate. His mother wouldn't be home until after midnight, and the silence felt oppressive. Their apartment was spartanly furnished. A small couch with a throw pillow to hide a cigarette burn from the previous tenant, a kitchen table with mismatched chairs, a television that only got basic channels. But on one wall, barely visible unless you knew to look for them, were his mother's military commendations in simple black frames. Marcus walked over to examine them more closely. The Purple Heart for wounds received in action. The Bronze Star with V device for valor. The Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with V device. The Combat Action Ribbon. And, yes, the Special Warfare Operator insignia. The SEAL trident that had taken his mother years of grueling training to earn. He took out his phone and photographed the awards, thinking maybe he could show them to his classmates. But even as he did it, he knew it wouldn't matter. Tyler had already planted the seed that photos could be faked, and his classmates seemed invested in their disbelief. They had made up their minds about what was possible and what wasn't, and his mother didn't fit their preconceptions. Marcus had grown up hearing fragments of his mother's stories, usually late at night when her pain kept her awake and she needed distraction. She had told him about the impossible physical standards she had to meet, standards that were the same for men and women because in combat, the enemy didn't care about your gender. She had described training exercises that pushed her to her absolute limits. Teammates who had initially doubted her, but eventually trusted her with their lives. Missions where quick thinking and precise execution meant the difference between success and catastrophe. But she had also told him about the constant scrutiny she faced, the way every mistake was magnified because people were watching for her to fail, the pressure to be not just good enough, but exceptional in order to earn the same respect that male SEALs received by default. She had excelled despite all of this, but the stress had taken a toll that went beyond the physical injuries she carried. The hardest part, she had told him once, wasn't the training or the missions. It was coming home and having people act like what you did was impossible, like you must be lying or confused about your own life. Now Marcus understood what she meant in a way he never had before. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend Jake Chun, Jessica's older brother who went to a different school. Heard you had a rough day in history class. Jess told me what happened. Marcus typed back quickly. Did she tell everyone I'm a liar? She just said you told some wild story about your mom being a Navy SEAL, and everyone laughed. Dude, why would you make something like that up? Marcus stared at the message for a long time before responding. Because it's true. Come on, man. You know I got your back, but female Navy SEALs? That's not really a thing. It is a thing. She is a thing. She's my mother, and she served her country and almost died doing it, and now she works security at night because her back is messed up from carrying gear that weighed more than some people, and everyone thinks I'm lying because they can't imagine that a woman could do what she did. He sent the message before he could talk himself out of it, then immediately regretted it. Jake was his best friend, but even Jake didn't believe him. If he couldn't convince his best friend, how could he hope to convince a classroom full of skeptical teenagers? Jake's response came quickly. Okay, I believe you believe it. Maybe there's some confusion about what role she actually had. Marcus set his phone aside without responding. There was no confusion. His mother had been a Navy SEAL. She had the training, the experience, the medals, the injuries, and the memories to prove it. The fact that other people couldn't accept this reality didn't make it less true. But it did make Marcus's life at school significantly more difficult. The next morning, Marcus hoped the incident would be forgotten, that his classmates would have moved on to other gossip and concerns. Instead, he found that Tyler Brooks had spent the evening researching women in the military and had come to school armed with what he considered definitive proof that Marcus was lying. I looked it up, Tyler announced to anyone who would listen during lunch period. Women weren't even allowed to try out for Navy SEAL training until like 2016, and none of them have passed yet. So unless Marcus's mom is some kind of secret superhero, he's totally making it up. This information spread quickly through the school's social networks. By the end of the day, Marcus felt like everyone was looking at him with a mixture of amusement and pity. He was becoming known as the kid who lies about his mom being a Navy SEAL, a reputation that seemed likely to follow him for the rest of his high school career. The worst part was that Tyler's research wasn't entirely wrong. The official integration of women into SEAL training was indeed recent, and no women had yet completed the full program through the standard pipeline. What Tyler didn't understand, and what Marcus couldn't explain without revealing classified details he wasn't sure he was allowed to share, was that his mother's path to the SEALs had been different, part of an earlier program that had operated under different parameters. Marcus went home that afternoon feeling defeated. He considered asking his mother to come to school, to show her awards to his class, to tell her story in her own words. But he knew she would refuse. She had built a life that allowed her to avoid exactly this kind of scrutiny and disbelief. She wouldn't appreciate him dragging her back into a situation where she would have to prove herself to a bunch of teenagers who had already made up their minds. As he sat in their quiet apartment, surrounded by the invisible weight of his mother's service and his classmates' disbelief, Marcus made a decision. He would find a way to prove his mother's story, not just for his own reputation, but because she deserved to have her service acknowledged and respected. He didn't know how he would do it, but he was determined to try. What Marcus didn't know was that his determination to honor his mother's service would soon set in motion a series of events that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in his American history class. Sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes the people who doubt us the most are the ones who need to learn the hardest lessons about the nature of courage, service, and sacrifice. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force everyone involved to reconsider their assumptions about what was possible, what was true, and what it really meant to serve one's country with honor. Marcus spent the weekend researching everything he could about women in special operations, particularly in programs that might have existed before the official integration policies that Tyler Brooks had cited. He knew his mother's story was true, but he needed to understand the larger context that would help others believe it. What he discovered was both encouraging and frustrating. There had indeed been classified programs in the early 2000s that had quietly trained women for special operations roles, particularly for missions where female operators were needed to interact with women and children in conservative cultures where male soldiers couldn't gain access. These programs had operated under different names and classifications, often falling outside the traditional SEAL training pipeline that most people knew about. But finding concrete information about these programs was nearly impossible. Most of the documentation was classified, and the women who had participated were often bound by non-disclosure agreements that prevented them from speaking publicly about their service. It was a catch-22. The very secrecy that had allowed these groundbreaking programs to exist was now preventing Marcus from proving his mother's participation in them. On Sunday evening, Marcus decided to approach the problem from a different angle. If he couldn't prove his mother's service through official channels, maybe he could at least find other people who had known her during her time in the military. He had heard his mother mention a few names over the years, teammates and commanders who had served alongside her. He started by searching social media for the names he could remember. It was a long shot, but military communities often maintain connections years after their service ended. After hours of searching through Facebook profiles and LinkedIn accounts, Marcus found something promising, a post in a closed Facebook group called Special Operations Veteran Support Network. The post was from someone named Chief Petty Officer Ret. Daniel Rodriguez, and it mentioned a Sarah T., who had served with his unit in Afghanistan. The post was from 3 months ago, part of a thread about female operators who had served in classified roles and were now struggling to get recognition for their service. Sarah T. was one of the best operators I ever worked with, the post read. Fearless, precise, and saved more lives than she'll ever get credit for. It's a shame that women like her have to stay in the shadows because the programs they served in are still classified. She earned her place at that table 100 times over. Marcus screenshot the post and spent the rest of the evening trying to figure out how to contact Chief Rodriguez. The Facebook group was closed, and he couldn't send direct messages without being a member. He tried searching for Daniel Rodriguez on other platforms, but the name was too common to yield useful results. Monday morning brought a new humiliation. Someone had created a meme using Marcus's school photo and shared it on Instagram with the caption, "When you lie about your mom being a Navy SEAL, but everyone can Google." The image showed Marcus's face with the text, "My mom is totally a secret superhero. Trust me, bro," in impact font. The meme had been shared dozens of times amongst students from his school and other nearby schools. Marcus felt sick as he scrolled through the comments, which ranged from laughing emojis to more pointed jokes about his mother's actual job as a security guard. "Maybe she guards a Navy base at the mall," one comment read. "Plot twist. She was in the Navy SEALs, but only on Call of Duty," said another. The worst part was seeing some of his classmates defending him in the comments, but in ways that still didn't believe his story. Leave Marcus alone. Maybe his mom just told him stories about being a SEAL, and he believed them, wrote Ashley Kumar, whose attempt at kindness somehow made Marcus feel even worse. During lunch, Marcus sat alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich, and tried to ignore the whispered conversations and pointed looks from other students. He was beginning to think that proving his mother's service wasn't worth the social destruction it was causing in his own life. Then, something unexpected happened. A girl from his history class named Maria Santos approached his table hesitantly. Maria was quiet in class, one of those students who did well academically, but didn't participate much in social dynamics. Marcus had never spoken to her directly, but he had noticed that she hadn't joined in the laughter when Tyler Brooks was mocking his story. "Hey," Maria said, sitting down across from him without invitation. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus looked up, wary of another interrogation about his mother's service. "Is your mom really a veteran?" Maria asked quietly. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "And she really served in special operations?" "Yes." Maria nodded slowly. "My uncle was in the Army Rangers. He doesn't talk about his service much, but sometimes when he drinks too much at family gatherings, he tells stories. Crazy stories about missions that sound like they came from a movie. My cousins always roll their eyes and act like he's exaggerating, but I think they're true." She paused, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "He told me once that he worked with some female operators on a mission in Iraq. He said they were incredible, that they could do things male soldiers couldn't do because they could gain access to places and people that were off limits to men. He said it was all classified and that most people would never know these women existed." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "Did he say what unit they were with?" "No, but he said they were the real deal. Elite. He had a lot of respect for them." Maria leaned forward. "I believe your mom was a SEAL. And I think the reason no one else believes it is because they don't want to believe it." For the first time since the classroom incident, Marcus felt like someone understood. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Maria said. Thank me when we prove it. I'm good at research. And I don't like bullies like Tyler Brooks thinking they know everything. She pulled out her phone. What's your mom's full name? When did she serve? What unit was she with? Marcus hesitated. His mother valued her privacy, and he didn't want to betray her trust. But he also knew that she deserved recognition for her service, and Maria seemed genuinely interested in helping rather than exposing his mother for entertainment. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, he said quietly. She served from 2001 to 2009. I think her unit was called something like Naval Special Warfare Development Group, but I'm not sure if that's the official name. Maria's eyes widened slightly. DevGru? That's SEAL Team 6. That's like the most elite unit in the military. You know about that? My uncle mentioned it once. He said those guys are like ghosts. They do missions that never officially happened. She was typing rapidly on her phone. If your mom was with DevGru, no wonder there's no public record of her service. Those operations are classified for decades. They spent the rest of lunch period researching on Maria's phone, finding fragments of information about classified programs and special access operations that had utilized female operators in the global war on terror. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was evidence that such programs had existed and that women like Marcus's mother could have participated in them. We need to find someone who served with her, Maria said as the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Someone who can vouch for her story. That afternoon in history class, Mrs. Rodriguez announced that they would be continuing their military service presentations. Marcus had hoped the topic would be dropped entirely, but several students still needed to present their family stories. As Tyler Brooks presented an elaborate PowerPoint about his grandfather's service in Vietnam, complete with photographs and official documents, Marcus couldn't help but notice the contrast with his own situation. Tyler had documentation, photographs, and family stories that were easily verified and socially acceptable. His grandfather's service fit neatly into established historical narratives that everyone could understand and believe. Marcus's mother's service was different. It existed in the shadows, in programs that had been designed to remain invisible, conducted by people who had been trained to never speak about their experiences. The very nature of her work made it impossible to prove in the conventional ways that his classmates expected. After class, Mrs. Rodriguez asked Marcus to stay behind. Marcus, she said once the other students had left, I want to talk to you about last week's presentation. Marcus braced himself for another request for documentation or another suggestion that he was confused about his mother's actual role. I've been thinking about what you said, Mrs. Rodriguez continued, and I realize I may have handled the situation poorly. Whether or not your mother was a Navy SEAL, it's clear that you believe she was, and that her service means something important to you. She sat down at her desk and gestured for Marcus to take a seat as well. I served in the Army myself, years ago, she said. And one thing I learned is that military service comes in many forms, some of which are never officially recognized. There were people I worked with who did extraordinary things that will never be acknowledged publicly because of the classified nature of their work. Marcus looked up, surprised. He hadn't known that Mrs. Rodriguez was a veteran. I'm not saying I know whether your mother's story is true or not, she continued. But I'm saying that I should have been more supportive when you were sharing something that was clearly important to you. And I should have shut down the mockery from other students more quickly. Thank you, Marcus said. Here's what I want to propose, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Next week is Veterans Day. I'm organizing a special assembly where local veterans will speak to the school about their service. If your mother would be willing to participate, I'd like to invite her to share her story. Marcus felt his stomach drop. I don't think she would want to do that. Think about it, Mrs. Rodriguez said. And if she's not comfortable speaking publicly, maybe she could just meet with our class privately. Sometimes the best way to address doubt is to provide people with the opportunity to ask questions directly. Marcus promised to ask his mother, but he already knew what her answer would be. Sarah Thompson had spent years avoiding exactly this kind of exposure. She wouldn't want to subject herself to skeptical teenagers and their intrusive questions, especially when she was already dealing with the physical and emotional challenges of her post-military life. That evening, Marcus waited for his mother to come home from work. It was nearly 1 a.m. when he heard her key in the door, and she looked exhausted as she dropped her security uniform in the laundry basket and collapsed onto the couch. How was school today? She asked automatically, the same question she asked every night. It was okay, Marcus said, which was his standard response. But tonight, instead of going to his room to let his mother decompress in peace, Marcus sat down on the couch beside her. "Mom," he said carefully, "can I ask you about your time in the Navy?" Sarah looked at him with sudden alertness. "What kind of question?" "I told my history class that you were a SEAL, and nobody believed me." Sarah closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. "Marcus, I've told you before that I don't like to talk about my service. It's complicated, but it's true, right? You really were a SEAL?" "Yes," she said quietly. "It's true." "Then, why won't you tell people? Why do you let them think you're lying?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Because proving it would require me to relive things I'd rather forget. Because the people who need proof are usually the same people who won't believe it even when it's right in front of them. And because I learned a long time ago that some battles aren't worth fighting. But this battle is about your honor," Marcus said. "It's about giving you credit for what you did." "My honor doesn't depend on what a bunch of teenagers think about me," Sarah replied. "I know what I did. The people who serve with me know what I did. That's enough." Marcus wanted to argue, but he could see that the conversation was causing his mother pain. She had made peace with her invisible service, with the lack of recognition, with the way her sacrifices had been forgotten by a world that preferred not to acknowledge her existence. But Marcus hadn't made peace with it. And as he went to bed that night, he made a decision that would change everything. If his mother wouldn't fight for recognition of her service, he would fight for it himself. He didn't know how, but he was going to find a way to prove her story and force his classmates to confront their own assumptions about what was possible. What Marcus didn't know was that his determination had already been noticed by people who could help him. The social media post about his mother's service had been seen by veterans who recognized the name Sarah Thompson, who remembered her courage and skill, and who were about to take action to ensure that her story was finally told. Tuesday morning started like any other day, with Marcus dreading the walk into school and the inevitable stares and whispers that had become part of his daily routine. The meme about his mother had spread even further over the weekend, and he had noticed some students from other schools pointing him out in the hallways, apparently having heard the story secondhand. But as Marcus approached his locker, he noticed something different. Maria Santos was waiting for him, and she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a tall, lean man in his 40s wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans. There was something about his posture and the way he scanned the hallway that immediately reminded Marcus of his mother. "Marcus," Maria said as he approached, "this is my uncle, David Santos, the one I told you about." David stepped forward and extended his hand. His grip was firm, and when Marcus looked into his eyes, he saw the same kind of intensity he sometimes glimpsed in his mother's expression. "Maria told me about your situation," David said quietly, "about your mother's service and the trouble you're having getting people to believe her story." Marcus nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I want you to know that your mother's service record is real," David continued. "I didn't serve with her directly, but I worked joint operations with DevGru during my time in the Rangers. Sarah Thompson was legendary among the special operations community. What she accomplished in Afghanistan and Iraq saved countless lives." Marcus felt his breath catch. This was the first time anyone outside his family had confirmed his mother's story. "The reason people don't know about operators like your mother," David continued, "is because their missions were so classified that most of the documentation is still sealed. They worked in programs that officially never existed, doing jobs that male operators couldn't do. Your mother earned her place in that community through pure skill and determination. Can you help me prove it?" Marcus asked desperately. David smiled grimly. "I've already started. After Maria reached out to me yesterday, I contacted some old friends who serve in the same time frame as your mother. We're working on something, but it's going to take a few more days to put together." "What kind of something?" "Let's just say that your mother's story is about to get some very credible witnesses." Before Marcus could ask more questions, the bell rang, and David had to leave for work. But he shook Marcus's hand again before walking away. "Your mother is a hero," he said. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Marcus walked to first period in a daze. For the first time since the classroom incident, he felt genuine hope that his mother's service would be recognized. But he also felt nervous about what David's plan might involve. His mother had been very clear about not wanting attention, and Marcus worried that well-meaning veterans might do something that would make her uncomfortable. During lunch, Tyler Brooks approached Marcus's table with his usual swagger and a new piece of evidence. "So, I did some more research about your mom," Tyler announced loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. "And I found out that even if women were allowed in some special programs, they definitely weren't allowed in combat roles. So your whole story is still obviously fake. Marcus looked up from his sandwich. Normally, this kind of confrontation would have made him retreat into himself. But David Santos's words had given him new confidence. You don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said calmly. Oh really? Tyler pulled out his phone. Because I have articles here that say, you have articles about official policy, Marcus interrupted. You don't have articles about classified operations because they're classified. You're researching the wrong things and drawing conclusions based on incomplete information. Tyler looked taken aback. This was a different response than he was used to getting from Marcus. Whatever, man, Tyler said. You can keep making up stories, but everyone knows you're lying. We'll see, Marcus said simply. Tyler walked away looking frustrated, and Marcus realized that something had changed in their dynamic. He was no longer apologizing or defending himself desperately. He was stating facts and letting others decide what to believe. That evening, Marcus told his mother about his encounter with David Santos. He expected her to be angry that he had involved other people in her private business, but instead she was quiet and thoughtful. David Santos, she repeated. I remember that name. He was with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Good soldier. He says he knows people who can vouch for your service. Sarah looked at Marcus for a long moment. What people? He didn't say exactly, but he seemed confident that he could prove your story. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at their parking lot. Marcus, I need you to understand something. The reason I don't talk about my service isn't just about privacy. Some of the things I did, some of the places I went, some of the people I worked with, that information is still sensitive. I can't have people digging into my background without knowing what they might uncover. Marcus felt a chill. What do you mean? I mean that proving my service might require revealing details that could put other people at risk. People who are still active duty, still working in classified roles. I won't do that just to satisfy some high school student's curiosity. But what if they could prove it without revealing sensitive information? Sarah turned back to him. Ow, I don't know. But David seemed to think there was a way. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about his mother's concerns. He had been so focused on proving her story that he hadn't considered the broader implications. If confirming her service meant endangering other people, then maybe it wasn't worth it. But at the same time, he couldn't bear the thought of continuing to let people mock his mother's sacrifice. Wednesday brought an unexpected development. Mrs. Rodriguez asked Marcus to stay after history class again, but this time she had a visitor waiting in the classroom. Marcus, she said, I'd like you to meet Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. No relation to me, just a coincidence with the name. He's here about the Veterans Day assembly I mentioned. The man who stood up to shake Marcus's hand was clearly military, even in civilian clothes. He had the same bearing Marcus had noticed in David Santos, the same alert eyes and confident posture. Your teacher told me about your mother's service, Master Chief Rodriguez said. Sarah Thompson, Naval Special Warfare. Marcus nodded, wondering if this was another person who was going to ask for proof or express doubt. I served with your mother, Master Chief Rodriguez continued. Afghanistan, 2007. She saved my life and the lives of 3 other SEALs during an operation that went sideways. Marcus felt his knees go weak. This was it, someone who had actually served with his mother, who could provide first-hand testimony about her service. She never mentioned you, Marcus said. We were only together for one mission, but it was a hell of a mission. Your mother earned my respect that day in a way that very few people have. He looked at Mrs. Rodriguez. Ma'am, would it be possible to speak with Marcus privately for a few minutes? Mrs. Rodriguez nodded and stepped out into the hallway. Son, Master Chief Rodriguez said once they were alone, I understand you've been having some problems with people believing your mother's story. Yes, sir. And I understand she doesn't want public attention. Yes, sir. She's very private about her service. That's common among operators who worked in the program she was involved in. They were trained to stay invisible, and that training doesn't go away just because they're civilians now. He sat down in one of the student desks. But here's the thing. Your mother earned recognition for her service, and she deserves to have her story told. She doesn't want to tell it herself. I know. That's why some of us who served with her are going to tell it for her. Marcus looked up sharply. What do you mean? Master Chief Rodriguez smiled. Let's just say that Veterans Day is going to be very interesting this year. When Marcus got home that evening, his mother was awake earlier than usual, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. Marcus, she said as soon as he walked in. I got a phone call at work today. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What kind of phone call? From Master Chief Rodriguez. Apparently, you met with him this afternoon. Mom, I didn't ask him to call you. I didn't even know he was going to be there. Sarah held up her hand. I'm not angry, but I need to know what's happening. Rodriguez says there are several veterans who want to speak publicly about my service at your school's Veterans Day assembly. Is that bad? I don't know yet. Rodriguez says they want to honor my service, not exploit it. But I'm worried about opening doors that I've worked very hard to keep closed. She took a sip of her coffee and studied Marcus's face. This is important to you, isn't it? Having people know the truth about my service? Marcus nodded. It's not fair that people think you're lying. It's not fair that you have to hide what you accomplished. Life isn't fair, Marcus. I learned that a long time ago. But this could be fair. Sarah was quiet for several minutes. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Rodriguez says the veterans who want to speak know how to talk about classified operations without compromising security. They want to tell the story of what I did without revealing details that could hurt anyone. What did you tell him? I told him I need time to think about it. That night, Marcus did something he had never done before. He pulled up videos online of military award ceremonies, Medal of Honor presentations, and veterans sharing their stories. He watched as service members were recognized for their courage and sacrifice, as their families beamed with pride, as entire communities came together to honor their contributions. His mother deserved that recognition. She deserved to have her story told with respect and honor. And if other veterans were willing to step forward to make that happen, maybe it was time for Sarah Thompson to step out of the shadows. What Marcus didn't know was that the wheels were already in motion. Master Chief Rodriguez had contacted not just one or two veterans who remembered Sarah Thompson, but an entire network of special operations personnel who had worked with her over the years. They had seen the social media posts about Marcus's situation. They had heard about the ridicule his mother's service was receiving, and they had decided collectively that enough was enough. Sarah Thompson had served her country with distinction in some of the most dangerous and demanding roles the military had to offer. She had earned her place among America's elite warriors through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And if she wasn't going to stand up for herself, then her brothers and sisters in arms are going to stand up for her. The only question was whether Sarah would let them. Thursday morning brought a development that caught everyone off guard. As Marcus walked into school, he noticed several people in the main office who clearly didn't belong there. Through the glass windows, he could see 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in business casual, but carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of military personnel. One of them was Master Chief Rodriguez, but Marcus didn't recognize the others. Maria Santos intercepted him before he reached his locker. Did you see them? She asked excitedly. The people in the office? Who are they? I think they're here about your mom. My uncle texted me this morning saying that the cavalry is arriving today. He said I should make sure you're in history class because something important is going to happen. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. His mother had still not given permission for other veterans to speak about her service, and he worried that they might be overstepping her boundaries. But at the same time, he couldn't help feeling hopeful that finally, someone with credibility would be able to silence his doubters. During first period, an announcement came over the intercom asking Marcus Thompson to report to the principal's office. As he walked through the hallways, Marcus could feel other students watching him, whispering among themselves about why he might be in trouble. When he arrived at the office, Principal Martinez greeted him with an expression that was hard to read, not angry, but definitely serious. Marcus, she said, I have some visitors who would like to speak with you. They're here about your family's military service. She led him to the conference room, where the 4 people he had seen earlier were waiting. Master Chief Rodriguez stood up and smiled, but the others remained seated with professional expressions. Marcus, Master Chief Rodriguez said, I'd like you to meet some people who served with your mother at various points in her career. The woman, who appeared to be in her late 30s with short brown hair and intelligent eyes, spoke first. I'm Captain Lisa Warren, Navy Special Warfare Command, she said. I was a lieutenant when I worked with your mother in 2008. She was my team leader on 3 separate operations. The man sitting next to her was older, with graying hair and numerous small scars on his hands. Command Master Chief Tom Mitchell, retired, he said. I was your mother's instructor during her advanced combat training. She was one of the finest operators I ever had the privilege to train. The third man was younger than the others, probably in his early 30s. "Lieutenant Commander James Parker," he said. "I served under your mother's command in Afghanistan. She saved my life on 2 separate occasions." Marcus looked around the room in amazement. These weren't just veterans who had heard stories about his mother. These were people who had worked directly with her, who had first-hand knowledge of her service and capabilities. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked. Captain Warren answered, "Because we become aware that your mother's service record has been questioned, and we feel that's unacceptable." Sarah Thompson was one of the most skilled and dedicated operators in the special warfare community. Her contributions to national security were significant, and she deserves recognition, not ridicule. "Does she know you're here?" Master Chief Rodriguez nodded. "We spoke with her last night. Initially, she asked us not to come, but we explained that this isn't just about her anymore. It's about ensuring that the sacrifice and service of all special operations personnel, including women who serve in classified roles, is properly understood and respected." Principal Martinez, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Marcus, these officers have presented me with documentation that confirms your mother's service record. They've also requested permission to address your history class specifically to provide educational context about women in special operations roles." "What did my mom say about that?" "She's agreed to it," Captain Warren said. "Reluctantly, but she's agreed. She said that if her story can help people understand that women have been serving in combat roles longer than most people realize, then maybe it's worth telling." Marcus felt a rush of emotions: relief, pride, gratitude, and a small amount of worry about how his mother would handle the attention. "When?" he asked. "This afternoon," Master Chief Rodriguez said. "During your regular history class period." The morning passed in a blur. Word had somehow spread through the school that something significant was going to happen in Marcus's history class, and students who weren't even in the class were asking if they could attend. Mrs. Rodriguez had to get permission from the administration to move the presentation to the auditorium to accommodate the interest. By lunchtime, Tyler Brooks had heard about the special presentation and was expressing his usual skepticism. "So now Marcus has hired actors to come pretend his mom was a Navy SEAL?" Tyler said loudly in the cafeteria. "This is getting ridiculous." "They're not actors," Maria Santos said firmly. "They're real military officers with real credentials. Anyone can put on a uniform and claim to be military," Tyler replied. "This is probably just some elaborate hoax Marcus and his mom cooked up because the story got so much attention." Marcus listened to this exchange with growing anger, but also with growing confidence. In a few hours, Tyler Brooks and everyone else would have to confront evidence that they couldn't dismiss or explain away. The truth was finally going to be told by people whose credibility couldn't be questioned. At 2 p.m., Marcus walked into the packed auditorium with nervous excitement. The 4 military officers were seated on stage along with Mrs. Rodriguez and Principal Martinez. Marcus took a seat in the front row, where his mother was waiting for him. Sarah Thompson looked nervous but determined. She was wearing a simple black blazer and slacks, and Marcus noticed that she had pinned her service ribbons to her lapel, the first time he had ever seen her wear any visible indication of her military background. "I'm proud of you for standing up for what was right," she whispered to Marcus as he sat down beside her. Mrs. Rodriguez began the presentation by explaining the purpose of the gathering and introducing the visiting officers. As each one stated their name, rank, and credentials, Marcus could see students throughout the auditorium sitting up straighter, realizing that this was not a hoax or a publicity stunt. Captain Warren spoke first, providing historical context about the evolution of women's roles in the military and the classified programs that had begun utilizing female operators in special operations roles as early as 2002. These programs existed because military commanders recognized that there were certain missions that required female personnel, she explained. In conservative cultures where women and children were off-limits to male soldiers, female operators could gain access to intelligence sources and potential threats that male operators could not reach. She clicked to a slide showing a map of Afghanistan and Iraq. The women who participated in these programs underwent the same intensive training as their male counterparts. They met the same physical standards, completed the same tactical courses, and demonstrated the same level of mental toughness required for special operations work. Master Chief Mitchell took over the presentation, describing the training process without revealing specific details about locations or methods. Sarah Thompson completed one of the most demanding training programs in the U.S. military, he said. The dropout rate for candidates in her program was over 80%. She not only completed the training, she excelled at it. Her marksmanship scores were in the top 5% of all candidates. Her tactical decision-making was consistently rated as exceptional by her instructors. Marcus could see students throughout the auditorium listening intently. Even Tyler Brooks, sitting several rows behind him, appeared to be paying attention with a serious expression rather than his usual smirk. Lieutenant Commander Parker spoke next, describing what it was like to serve under Sarah Thompson's command without revealing details about specific operations. Sergeant Thompson, she was enlisted at the time, was my team leader on multiple missions, he said. I was a new officer, green as grass, and she had more tactical experience than I could have imagined. She saved my life on at least 2 occasions that I can remember, once by spotting an IED that I'd walked right past, and once by providing covering fire when our position was overrun. He paused and looked directly at Marcus. Your mother was fearless when she needed to be, cautious when the situation demanded it, and always focused on bringing everyone home safely. She was exactly the kind of person you want beside you when everything goes wrong. Master Chief Rodriguez concluded the presentation by addressing the broader issue of recognition for classified service. Many veterans, both men and women, have served in roles that will never be fully acknowledged publicly because of the sensitive nature of their work, he said. Sarah Thompson is one of many heroes whose service has remained largely invisible because the missions they conducted and the programs they participated in are still classified. He gestured towards Sarah, who was sitting stiffly in the front row. But just because her service was classified doesn't make it any less real, any less significant, or any less deserving of respect. Sarah Thompson served her country with distinction for 8 years, during which time she conducted more than 40 combat missions and saved countless lives. When the formal presentation ended, Principal Martinez opened the floor for questions. Marcus held his breath, wondering if students would ask respectful questions or challenge the officer's credibility. The first hand to go up belonged to Jessica Chun, who had always been one of the more academically serious students in their class. Captain Warren, Jessica said, how many women serve in these special operations programs? I can't give you exact numbers because much of that information is still classified, Captain Warren replied. But I can tell you that there were enough female operators to make a significant contribution to mission success in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Tyler Brooks raised his hand next. Marcus tensed, expecting him to ask a confrontational question, but Tyler's tone was subdued. Master Chief Mitchell, Tyler said, if these programs existed, why isn't there more public information about them? Because secrecy was essential to their success, Mitchell replied. The effectiveness of special operations depends partly on the enemy not knowing your capabilities, your methods, or sometimes even your existence. Many aspects of these programs remain classified to protect current operations and personnel. A girl from Marcus's class named Ashley Kumar raised her hand. Mrs. Thompson, she said, addressing Marcus's mother directly, what made you want to join the military? Sarah Thompson stood up slowly and walked to the microphone. Marcus could see her hands shaking slightly, but her voice was clear and strong. I joined because I want to serve my country, she said simply. And when I was offered the opportunity to train for special operations, I took it because I knew I could handle it, and because I wanted to make a difference in a role where I could have maximum impact. She paused and looked around the auditorium. I didn't expect recognition for my service. I didn't do it for medals or awards or public acknowledgement. I did it because it was my job and because the people I served with depended on me to do it well. Another student raised her hand. Why didn't you tell people about your service when you got out? Sarah was quiet for a moment before answering. Because civilian life requires different skills than military life, and I wanted people to judge me based on what I could do for them, not based on what I had done in the past. And because some of the things I experienced in the military were difficult, and I wasn't ready to talk about them. She looked at Marcus. I also wanted to protect my son from having to carry the weight of my experiences. But I realize now that trying to hide my service may have done him a disservice. He should be proud of what I accomplished, and he shouldn't have to defend my honor alone. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, with students asking thoughtful questions about military service, women in combat roles, and the challenges of transitioning to civilian life. Marcus was amazed at how respectful and engaged his classmates were, even those who had been most skeptical of his story. As the presentation concluded and students began to file out of the auditorium, Tyler Brooks approached Marcus with an expression that was hard to read. "Hey," Tyler said awkwardly. Marcus waited for him to continue. "I owe you an apology," Tyler said. "I was wrong about your mom, and I was a jerk about how I handled it." "I'm sorry." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology even though he was still angry about the humiliation Tyler had caused. "It's okay," Marcus said, though it wasn't entirely true. "No, it's not okay," Tyler replied. "I made fun of something I didn't understand, and I made you feel bad for being proud of your mom. That was wrong." Tyler extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus shook it. As the auditorium emptied, Marcus stood with his mother and the visiting officers. He felt emotionally drained, but also profoundly relieved. The truth had finally been told, and it had been told by people whose credibility couldn't be questioned. "Thank you," he said to the officers. "All of you. This means everything to me." Captain Warren smiled. "Your mother earned this recognition years ago. We're just sorry it took so long for her to receive it." As they walked toward the exit, Sarah put her arm around Marcus's shoulders. "I'm proud of you for not giving up," she said. "It took courage to keep standing up for the truth when everyone was telling you it was impossible." "I learned that from you," Marcus replied. That evening, the story of the presentation spread quickly through social media, but this time the tone was completely different. Instead of mocking memes, students were posting respectful messages about Marcus's mother's service and expressing admiration for her courage and sacrifice. Marcus's phone buzzed with text messages from classmates who wanted to apologize for doubting his story, from friends who wanted to express their support, and from people he barely knew who had been inspired by the presentation. But the most meaningful message came from his best friend Jake Chun. "Dude, your mom is a legitimate badass. I'm sorry I didn't believe you." As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. His mother's service was no longer a secret shame that he had to defend alone. It was now a source of pride that had been validated by people whose word could not be questioned. More importantly, his mother seemed different too. She was sitting straighter, speaking more confidently, and for the first time in years, she seemed comfortable with who she was rather than trying to hide from her own achievements. The truth had been told, and it had set them both free. The weeks following the auditorium presentation brought changes that Marcus could never have anticipated. What had started as a simple attempt to defend his mother's honor had somehow grown into something much larger and more meaningful. The first sign that their story was reaching beyond their school came 3 days after the presentation, when Mrs. Rodriguez informed Marcus that a local television news station wanted to interview him and his mother about women in special operations roles. Sarah was initially reluctant to participate, but when a reporter explained that the story would focus on the broader issue of recognition for classified service rather than specific operational details, she agreed to a brief interview. The news segment aired the following Friday during the evening broadcast, featuring interviews with Marcus, Sarah, and Captain Warren, who had agreed to speak about the historical significance of women in special operations roles. The story was respectful and informative, focusing on the challenges faced by veterans whose service couldn't be easily documented due to its classified nature. Marcus watched the broadcast with his mother in their small living room, still hardly believing that their personal struggle had become a news story. But what surprised him even more was the response the story generated. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," Sarah told him the next morning, showing him a list of messages from veterans organizations, military historians, and other families who had faced similar challenges in getting recognition for classified service. One message was from a woman named Jennifer Martinez, whose husband had served in a classified special operations role and had struggled to get appropriate medical care for service-connected injuries because his medical records were largely sealed. Another was from Dr. Patricia Williams, a military historian who was writing a book about women in special operations and wanted to interview Sarah for her research. Most unexpectedly, there was a message from the office of their state's U.S. Senator requesting a meeting to discuss legislation that would improve recognition and support for veterans of classified programs. "I never expected any of this," Sarah admitted as she scrolled through the messages. "I thought we would tell the story once, and that would be the end of it. Are you okay with all the attention?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "It's overwhelming, but it's also gratifying. For years, I felt like my service didn't matter because no one knew about it. Now I'm realizing that there are a lot of people who do understand the value of what I did, even if they couldn't talk about it openly." The attention brought unexpected opportunities as well. A local veterans organization offered Sarah a position as an outreach coordinator, helping other veterans navigate the challenges of transitioning to civilian life. The job paid significantly more than her security guard position and would allow her to use her military experience in a meaningful way. More importantly for Marcus, the revelation of his mother's true background had fundamentally changed his relationship with his classmates and teachers. Where he had once been seen as either a liar or a dreamer, he was now viewed with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Students who had never spoken to him before approached him in the hallways to ask questions about his mother's service or to share their own family's military stories. Tyler Brooks, who had been Marcus's primary tormentor, had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The day after the television news story aired, Tyler approached Marcus with a proposal that caught him completely off guard. "My dad wants to meet your mom," Tyler said awkwardly. "He saw the news story, and he says he wants to apologize for the things he told me about women not being capable of special operations service." Tyler's father, Marcus learned, was indeed a Marine recruiter, and he had been operating under outdated information about women's roles in the military. The revelation that female operators had been serving successfully in classified roles for over a decade had challenged his assumptions about military capabilities and gender roles. The meeting between Sarah Thompson and Sergeant Brooks was emotionally charged. Sergeant Brooks, a career Marine who prided himself on understanding military culture, was visibly shaken as he listened to Sarah describe her training and service. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I owe you an apology, and I owe your son an apology. I passed on information to my son that was incomplete and outdated, and he used that information to question your service. That was unacceptable." Sarah accepted his apology graciously, but she also used the opportunity to educate him about the broader challenges faced by women in the military. "The problem isn't malicious intent," she explained. "The problem is that women's contributions to military operations have often been invisible or underreported. People can't respect what they don't know exists." This conversation led to Sergeant Brooks requesting that Sarah speak to groups of potential military recruits about opportunities for women in the armed forces. Her presentations were so well received that word spread through the local recruiting community, and Sarah found herself speaking at high schools throughout the region. For Marcus, watching his mother embrace her role as an advocate and educator was deeply satisfying. She was finally able to talk openly about her experiences and to help other people understand the realities of military service for women. The pain and pride that she had carried privately for so many years was now being channeled into something positive and productive. The academic year continued with Marcus enjoying a dramatically different social experience. His history teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, used his mother's story as a case study in her other classes, examining how historical narratives are shaped by what information is available to the public and how classified operations create gaps in our understanding of military history. "Your mother's story illustrates an important point about historical research," Mrs. Rodriguez told her students. "Just because we don't have documentation of something doesn't mean it didn't happen. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." Marcus also found that his relationship with his mother had evolved in unexpected ways. Where their conversations had once been limited by her reluctance to discuss her past, they now spent hours talking about her experiences, her perspectives on current military issues, and her hopes for improving recognition for other veterans in similar situations. "I was so focused on protecting you from the difficult parts of my military experience," Sarah told him one evening, "that I forgot to share the positive parts. I'm proud of what I accomplished, and you should know the full story, not just the parts that fit into easy explanations." These conversations gave Marcus a deeper understanding not just of his mother's service, but of the complexities of military life, the challenges of transitioning to civilian careers, and the importance of supporting veterans whose service doesn't fit conventional narratives. As Veterans Day approached, the same holiday that had prompted the original classroom assignment, Marcus's school decided to feature Sarah as the keynote speaker for their annual assembly. This was a dramatic change from the previous year, when the assembly had featured a retired Army colonel who had spoken primarily about conventional military service. Sarah's Veterans Day address focused on the theme of invisible service, the men and women who served their country in roles that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, whose contributions to national security would never be fully documented, and whose sacrifices often went unrecognized. Service comes in many forms, she told the assembled students, faculty, and community members. Some service is celebrated with parades and public recognition. Other service happens in the shadows, known only to a few people who can never speak publicly about what they witnessed. She looked directly at Marcus, sitting in the front row. My son taught me that hiding my service wasn't protecting him. It was teaching him to be ashamed of something he should be proud of. The courage he showed in standing up for the truth, even when everyone around him said it was impossible, reminded me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is difficult. The audience gave Sarah a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Marcus watched with tears in his eyes as his mother received the recognition she had always deserved but had never sought. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached Sarah to thank her for her service, to share their own military stories, or to ask questions about opportunities for women in the armed forces. Marcus stood beside her, no longer the embarrassed teenager who had been mocked for his mother's impossible story, but a proud son whose determination to honor his mother's service had helped change not just their own lives, but the lives of other veterans who had felt invisible and forgotten. The most meaningful moment came when Tyler Brooks approached them with his younger sister, who was a sophomore considering military service after high school. Mrs. Thompson, Tyler said, "My sister wants to ask you about special operations opportunities for women." As Sarah began explaining the current programs and opportunities available to young women interested in military service, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first classroom presentation months ago. What had started as a humiliating attempt to share his family's story had evolved into something much more significant. His mother was no longer hiding from her past, but embracing it as a platform for advocacy and education. His classmates had learned important lessons about making assumptions and questioning official narratives. And Marcus himself had discovered the power of persistence in defending truth, even when that truth seemed impossible to others. Later that evening, as they walked home from the Veterans Day ceremony, Sarah put her arm around Marcus's shoulders. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For not letting me disappear. For insisting that my service mattered. For refusing to let other people's limitations define what was possible." Marcus smiled. "I learned that from you. Everything I know about not giving up, I learned from watching you." As they reached their apartment building, Marcus realized that their small living space no longer felt like a place where they were hiding from the world. It felt like a home where a decorated veteran and her proud son were planning their next steps in a journey that was far from over. The story that had begun with ridicule and disbelief had become a story of recognition and redemption. Sarah Thompson's service was no longer a secret to be hidden or a claim to be defended. It was a source of pride, an educational tool, and an inspiration to others who had served their country in ways that might never be fully acknowledged. And Marcus Thompson was no longer the kid who lied about his mother being a Navy SEAL. He was the young man whose courage in defending the truth had helped ensure that his mother's service and the service of countless other invisible veterans would never be forgotten again. 6 months later, Sarah Thompson testified before a congressional subcommittee about the need for improved recognition and support for veterans of classified programs. Sitting in the gallery, watching his mother provide expert testimony to elected officials about military policy, Marcus thought about how far they had come from that embarrassing day in history class. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Sometimes the impossible turns out to be not only possible, but heroic. And sometimes a teenager's determination to honor his mother's service can change not just 2 lives, but an entire community's understanding of what service and sacrifice really mean. The classroom had ridiculed a teen over his mom's SEAL story. But when veteran SEALs walked in with the truth, everything changed. And in the end, the truth had been worth fighting for.